Thank you, everyone, for joining us for today's webinar, which is jointly hosted by the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, as well as Jewish Federations of Canada, United Israel Appeal. My name is Jordan Kerbel, and I am the Deputy Director of Communications and Training here at CIJA. Our CEO, Shimon Fogel, wanted to be with us today to deliver these introductory remarks, but he was going to be testifying at the Senate Standing Committee on Human Rights. This is regarding Bill S-201, which, if passed, would prevent genetic discrimination here in Canada. That is a challenge that disproportionately affects Jewish Canadians. If you want to learn more about genetic discrimination, simply go to our website, www.cija.ca, and search genetic discrimination. There's some very valuable and important information on this important file. Now, as the advocacy agent of Canada's family of Jewish federations, CIJA has been closely monitoring the ongoing debate among Israelis over the question of whether the Knesset should adopt a basic law on Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people. While this intended bill and all legislation is now postponed pending the results of the March 17th election, this issue, which has significant attention both within and beyond the Jewish community, will no doubt come up again when Israelis head to the polls. Now, if and when the next Israeli government tables legislation on Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people, CIJA will closely review the text, engage community members, and formulate its position in response to the bill. Now, in order to strengthen our understanding of this issue, today's webinar will feature two speakers with distinct contrasting points of view regarding this complex issue. We here at CIJA firmly believe that healthy and constructive debate within our community on tough issues is not only possible, it is essential for a vibrant, open-minded, and inclusive community. Now, if you would like to find out more about CIJA, our range of activities, and the issues facing our community, or if you would like to simply be included in one of our mailing lists, please do visit our website, www.cija.ca, like us on Facebook, or follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @CIJAinfo. Now, before I introduce our speakers, I will take a moment to explain the format. Presenting the case for a Jewish state law is Dr. Yoram Hazany. Presenting the case against a Jewish state law is Dr. Mir Sukharov. Each speaker will take 15 minutes to present their thesis, followed by questions from those of you participating in today's webinar. Now, audience members may submit questions by chat. So to pose a question, simply click on the arrow next to chat, which is beneath the video. After you've typed and sent your question, you can return to the video by clicking on the arrow next to participants. If you are in full screen mode, you simply need to click on the host video icon in order to submit a question via chat. If you double click on the video, it will change to full screen mode. And if you want to exit full screen mode, just hit the escape button on your keyboard. We have approximately 300 people registered this afternoon, so we will endeavor to get to as many questions as possible. On that note, I want to begin by thanking our two speakers for sharing their time and their knowledge. We have flipped a coin to determine the order of speaking, and Dr. Yoram Hazany will be presenting first. Yoram is currently president of the Herzl Institute, which is a research and educational hub that was established in Jerusalem in 2013. He is also director of the John Templeton Foundation's project in Jewish philosophical theology, and a member of the Israel Council for Higher Education's commission reviewing the general studies and liberal arts programs in all of Israel's universities and colleges. Yoram was born in Rehovot, Israel in 1964. He completed his PhD at Rutgers University in political theory in 1993. He currently lives in Jerusalem. Yoram, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Please now present your case for a Jewish state bill.
Well, look, Jewish state law is, can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Yoram. Everything's great. Please go ahead.
Okay, so the legislation we're talking about, we're calling it the Jewish state law. This is a piece of constitutional legislation whose purpose is to defend the status of Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people. So it's a very much a status quo piece of legislation. The reason that we're talking about it at all, and have been for the last 10 years, is because of a crisis in a constitutional crisis in Israel that began in the mid-1990s, early 2000s, when the Supreme Court of the State of Israel interpreted new constitutional legislation as mandating the gradual erosion, you could even say the gradual dismantling of Israel's character as the nation-state of the Jewish people. And the purpose of this legislation is to return to the status quo prior to the mid-1990s and to protect legislation that we fear otherwise would be overturned. Let me give some examples of the kinds of things that we're looking at. When we talk about Israel as a Jewish state, we're considering, for example, the idea that there should be a Jewish school system, and that in Israel, every Jewish child should have the right to receive a free public Jewish education in which he or she will be versed in Jewish Bible, in Jewish history, in the Hebrew language. And we all know that this kind of education is extremely difficult to come by in the diaspora. Countries like the United States and Canada are in many ways wonderful to the Jewish people and to Jews, but you basically have to be quite a wealthy person to be able to afford a Jewish education of this kind. The State of Israel was created in order to be able to educate Jewish children for free, and that's something that we do. Second example has to do with Israel's security services. As you know, Israel was born out of the trauma, in part out of the trauma of the Holocaust. Again, despite our great admiration for nations such as the United States and Canada and Great Britain, the fact is that we all know that those nations were not able to act in order to save Jews during the Second World War. This is not something that I personally feel like we need to be blaming those countries for. They certainly had plenty on their plates. The purpose of Britain is to worry about the British, and the purpose of a Jewish state is to worry about the Jewish people. That, in any case, was the view of Israel's founding fathers. And when Israel was declared in 1948, one of its principal purposes was to be able to field a military and security services that would make sure that Jews would be protected all over the world whenever they're threatened, whenever they're endangered. And that's something that we've seen time and time again, that Israel's military operated for over a decade in Ethiopia to rescue Ethiopian Jewry. And that's one of the central purposes of the state. Similarly, the law of return, a repatriation law, which allows Jews anywhere in the world to come to Israel and receive automatic citizenship, be guaranteed a place to immigrate to. We all understand that if there had been such a state prior to World War II, that many of those millions who were lost might have been saved. And the concern among those of us who have been working over the past decade to try to restore the status quo with regard to Jewish state legislation constitutionally is precisely this question: whether these kinds of provisions, the Jewish educational system, an armed forces that can serve Jewish needs and interests, the law of return and other such provisions, whether we can block them from being overturned by a future court. Now, quite a few people have expressed the concern that thinking of Israel in terms of Jewish self-determination as the state of the Jewish people is in some respect racist or undemocratic. It's a little bit painful to hear people raise this kind of question. When Israel was founded, and for 100 years or more prior to that, the idea of self-determination for nations, especially for persecuted nations like the Jews, who needed to be able to defend themselves, was considered to be a liberal cause, a progressive cause. John Stuart Mill proposed the idea of national self-determination as the guiding principle for bringing justice and well-being to the peoples of the world. Woodrow Wilson, a prominent progressive, of course, considered it to be the basis of the world order that was supposed to rise after World War I. So this is an old liberal progressive idea which Theodor Herzl and the Zionist movement participated in, taking up just one corner. We were just one people that was involved in this picture. More generally in Europe, oppressed, conquered peoples from Greece to Ireland to Italy to Poland received their self-determination. And when we look at Europe today, what we see is, in fact, a continent filled with independent peoples and independent nations, each of whom expresses, according to their own independence and their own self-determination, expresses their own national character. Now, if you take a look at Europe today, for example, at the democratic nations that are members of the European Union, there are 28 such nations. And of those 28 nations, by my count, there are at least 14 of them which are legally constituted as nations that have what the Europeans call kin nations, that are connected to diaspora peoples, to peoples who are related to that particular nation. They have repatriation laws, much like the law of return. I'm talking about the every country from Germany up north to Finland, down to Estonia, then all the way down south to Greece. All of those nations are nations that are much like Israel in that they have links to a particular national people, and those links are recognized in European policy. By the way, those other European nations that are not like Israel in that sense are also particularist democracies. For example, the 5 Scandinavian countries from Finland over to Iceland all have established churches. We know that England has an established church and has 3 crosses on its flag, and its bishops sit in Parliament. And even nations that are whose constitutions are less explicitly particularistic, let's take Italy and Austria, are nonetheless countries in which, if you go to public schools, you'll find a crucifix on the wall. Even countries like France or Spain, which pride themselves on their neutrality with respect to national and religious issues, are nevertheless extremely aggressive in advancing the French language and the Spanish language. In other words, almost every country in Europe, although they're all good democracies, has its own character, its own constitution, its own understanding of what the needs of its particular people is. And there should be absolutely no question that Israel, as the only democratic nation in the Middle East, is a democracy just like all the other democracies in Europe and like many other around the world. I should add that in addition to the concept of Israel as a Jewish state being precisely within the concept of a European nation state as it was developed and advanced to this day, the fate of Israel also has a great impact on the future of peace, the prospects for peace in the Middle East. As you know, Israel's sitting in the midst of a maelstrom in which we look around us from Libya to Syria, Iraq, down to Yemen, and God forbid, quite a few other countries. There's what I would call a general crisis of legitimacy of the entire state system in the Middle East today. And if we look forward to trying to figure out what a possible solution is going to be, well, you can see that that one of the principal questions at least that I think humanitarians and decent people everywhere should be asking themselves, is how are we going to move to a Middle East in which the 30 million Kurds who have been oppressed for a century now under brutal anti-Kurdish rule in every country in which they live. And likewise, the Alawite people, the Druze people, the Christian Assyrians, and many other minorities in the region, how can we possibly bring about a situation in which they can have the kind of security and well-being relative security and well-being that Jews have had since we've had our own state, and the ability to protect themselves? And I think many in Israel understand that there is, we can wait 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and continue to try to maintain the defunct state system in the Middle East. But the fact is there's not going to be peace in the Middle East until the borders are redrawn, until there's an independent Kurdistan, an independent Christian state in the area of Nineveh, an independent Druze and Alawite states, and independent Sunni and Shiite Arab states. And each of these states will be like Israel in the sense that it will be a nation state. It will have a law of return that will allow persecuted peoples to be able to flee to it, and it will have an armed forces that is mandated to defend its people, just as the state of Israel is mandated to defend the Jews. Now, this is an old vision. This is the vision of Theodor Herzl and of David Ben-Gurion and of the Zionist founders. We know that this concept of a Jewish state, which could be a beacon to the peoples of the Middle East and to the world in its self-determination for Jews, this kind of nation state was not only proposed by Herzl, but it was adopted by British policymakers and later by the United Nations, which voted for the establishment of a Jewish state in 1947. It was accepted by every Jewish political party in Palestine in 1948 in the Declaration of Independence, which refers to Israel as a Jewish state no fewer than 5 times, and as the state of the Jewish people, and variations on it another 8 times. What we have is an excellent form of government for pursuing the defense and the aspirations and the advancement of the Jewish people in Israel, in Israel and in the world. It's a form of government that, as I say, is the envy of many peoples in the Middle East and around the world. And what we propose to do is simply to maintain this traditional Zionist conception of a Jewish state, which has always defended the political and civil liberties of minorities that live within the country. There's never been a question about that, but at the same time is defending political and civil equality for all minorities within Israel. We still nonetheless wish to pursue self-determination for the Jewish people in our own homeland.
Dr. Hasni, thank you very much. Right now, we'd like to go to Dr. Mira Sukharov, who will be offering the dissenting opinion, the case against the Jewish state bill. Dr. Sukharov is Associate Professor of Political Science at Carleton University. She holds a PhD in government from Georgetown University, as well as an MA in political science from the University of Toronto. Mira specializes in psychological and identity approaches to international relations, Israeli-Palestinian relations, and diaspora Jewish politics. Dr. Sukharov is also a blogger for Aref and for the Jewish Daily Bulletin Forward, and she writes a regular column in the Ottawa Jewish Bulletin. Mira, thank you again for joining us this afternoon. Please now present your case against a Jewish state bill.
You're laying out your case. In the next few minutes allotted to me, I'm going to start by really thinking about what may be broken in the current political arena. So if we're thinking about the need for a new bill, we want to make sure that the bill is actually fixing something. We can talk later about what might be motivating the bill and whether there's pernicious motives or whether there's simply benign identity assertion motives or whether the bill is simply an assertion of the right to Jewish national self-determination, as Yoram alluded to, whether it's simply following alongside other expressions of national religion and national symbols in other countries, as Yoram also alluded to. We can talk about the reasons for it, but what I want to do is see what the effects will be. So I'm going to start by laying out all the issues that I think face Israel and Israelis today. So one of the issues, I think, I'll just lay them out briefly and then we'll talk about them. So everything from the ongoing issue of Arab-Jewish relations inside Israel proper, meaning the 20% of Israeli citizens who are Palestinian. What is the state of Arab-Jewish relations or Palestinian-Israeli relations among the citizenry? Where are points of tension and what might this bill have on that? Similarly, asylum seekers. Right now, Israel has 60,000 asylum seekers, mostly from Eritrea and Sudan, who are trying to flee persecution and heartache. What is Israel's, we could ask, what is Israel facing? We could ask what its responsibilities, legal and moral, are, but what is the policy issue that Israel is facing with regard to these asylum seekers, and will this bill help or hurt? Third, socioeconomic disparities. We saw in 2011, in the summer of that year, thousands of protesters setting up in tents along Israel's Tony Rothschild Boulevard in Tel Aviv and then throughout the country. Socioeconomic disparities, the gap between rich and poor, the plight of the middle class, the inability for young singles and couples to buy a first home or apartment is an ongoing issue, as we've seen with the shake-up with young new members of Knesset in the last round of Knesset elections. Will this bill help or hurt that? Israeli-Palestinian negotiations that have frozen away and seem to be on a recurring deathbed. Will this bill help or hurt that? The ongoing occupation, now having reached 47 years, will the bill help or hurt? Four more issues I can think of. Civil religious tensions in Israel. That's even simply within the Jewish community themselves. Do non-Orthodox communities have the right to pray where they want? Do their rabbis have the right to conduct marriages? We know they don't. Can Israeli citizens get married via the state rather than through having to go to their respective religious officers? We know they can't. Will this bill help or hurt civil religious issues? Three more, the slide into illiberalism. Over the last few years, we've seen bills introduced in the Knesset that verge on a very stark, non-liberal, anti-liberal, even partly authoritarian expression of Israeli national conduct. Bills like loyalty oaths or attempts to criminalize boycott of settlement products just via speech acts. Will this bill help or hurt Israel's slide into illiberalism? Will the bill help or hurt Israel-diaspora relations? And finally, will this bill help or hurt the ongoing international delegitimation of Israel, the boycott issues, and Israel's overall troubled standing, both in the region and in the world? I will argue that on all these 9 issues, with the exception of socioeconomic disparities, where the effect is much more tangential, but still possibly there, I would argue that this bill will hurt, not help, and not be neutral, but actually hurt Israel's efforts in all 9 primary issues facing Israeli government and society today. Now, what this bill doesn't do, it doesn't simply enshrine Israel's right to exist, as Yoram spoke eloquently about the need and the right of nations to determine themselves on the world stage. Nor does it simply underscore the presence of a dominant religion or the presence of state symbols, as Yoram alluded to as well. We've seen one article that I found particularly helpful. I'll just give a shout out to my colleague at the Forward, J.J. Goldberg, who wrote eloquently about the right of states and the common practice of states to have dominant religions, national religions, state symbols that embody a particular cultural trope. But there are other problems with this bill, problems fundamentally related to Israel's democratic character. So let me go through some of these issues. Most poignantly and most troublingly, the state of Arab-Jewish relations, the state of Palestinian-Israeli citizenry relations inside Israel are in trouble. We have mayors who want to belittle the right of Arabs to have their own resources in their town. We have overtly racist statements out of some politicians. We have certainly a lot of casual racism, and we have, as we know, major legal issues with the right of all citizens of Israel to live and buy land wherever they want. This is not, in this context, Israel's democracy is flawed. The fact that this nation-state bill might further underscore the right of Jews to bar Palestinian citizens from purchasing land and living where they want is quite a troubling potential outcome of this bill. Not only the fact that the bill symbolically underscores what we already have as, in many ways, a second-class citizenry among the Palestinian citizens of Israel, 20% of Israelis, of course, are Palestinian citizens. A bill like this further underscores morale. A bill like this may further inflame the tendency of Palestinian Israelis to vote in fewer numbers than Jewish Israelis. So in other words, voter turnout is lower in a Palestinian Israeli community than in the Jewish Israeli community. Lower voter turnout means more of a sense of disenfranchisement, means more of potentially more extra legal and extra political and extra democratic ways of expressing grievances. So the last thing we want, in other words, is Palestinians to riot and feel that they are not being represented by the state of whom they are citizens. The asylum seekers, we see a continuation of bills that limit the freedom of asylum seekers, that keep them in open-air style prisons, that sidestep Israel's obligations under international refugee conventions. A bill like this underscores Israel's fundamental demographic fear of Jewish primacy being eroded. And when you have symbolic expressions like this of primacy among the Jews, however understandable it might be from an identity politics perspective, you certainly can have a very easy and frightening slide into illiberalism and into even less of a willingness on the part of Israel to adhere to its international obligations. In this case, I'm talking about in the case of asylum seekers. On socioeconomic disparities, clearly the bill isn't aimed at the lower class. It's not a socioeconomic bill in nature. But it could even, I would argue, I would venture to say, could even have some ramifications on that, on the issue of the overly squeezed middle class and the disparity between poor and rich. And that's simply in that, on average, Palestinian citizens of Israel also suffer economically. So a bill that further disenfranchises them could have further implications on the already troubling wealth gaps within Israel that create their own political tensions. Now, this bill isn't really about Israeli-Palestinian relations over the Green Line. It isn't really about Israel, or it isn't necessarily about relations between the Israeli government and the Palestinian Authority. But even there, 47 years of occupation, a lack of a clear willingness and clear good faith efforts on the part of the Israeli government to negotiate, primarily with regard to ongoing settlement ongoing settlement building, ongoing confiscation of Palestinian land, ongoing collective punishment. A bill like this can serve as, on the benign side, it can serve as simply a healthy expression of Jewish identity on the world stage, a healthy expression of Herzl's type of Zionism, as Yoram referred to. But it can also lead to the type of national xenophobia, national chest thumping, national swaggering that can serve to increase the sense of polarization that already exists between Israel's national desires and their view of whether the Palestinians deserve the same. So I would argue that both on Israeli-Palestinian negotiation lines and on occupation issues, this bill will hurt. What about on refugee issues? Meaning not the asylum seekers for now, but the Palestinian refugees, 5 million or so of them, who claim the right of return to Israel. Will this bill help? I would argue, again, it can help to underscore Israel's national desire to remain a Jewish state. It certainly underscores Israel's concern about demographic threats. But insofar as the refugee issue is going to have to be negotiated at the Israeli peace process negotiating table, this bill serves as a measure, again, of bad faith. The Palestinian Authority president already holds little faith in Israel's willingness to negotiate in good faith. Bills like this make the Palestinian Authority feel even more protective of their Palestinian Israeli citizen brethren, more protective of the 20% of Palestinians, of Israeli citizens who are Palestinian. They make them more hardline potentially on the 4 to 5 million Palestinian refugees who long to return, because in a sense it feels like an end run around the Palestinian refugee issue. I mean, we all know, the international community knows that most likely there will not be wholesale return. Most likely return, if at all, will occur in a new Palestinian state if and when we should see a two-state solution. But the issue has to be negotiated. These kinds of end run identity politics attempts serve to harden hearts. On civil religious tensions, again, a huge issue within Israel, in this case not something between Israelis and Palestinians, but within the Jewish community themselves, and also between the Palestinian community, those who don't want to go through their own religious figures to marry. And certainly if a Jew and a Palestinian citizen of Israel were to want to fall in love and marry, there is no channel for that. So there's no way for two citizens of the country to simply show up at the courthouse and get married. A big issue for diaspora Jews who see that their streams of Judaism are not recognized through state channels. A big issue for Israeli citizens who live, though they live in a democracy, it has more and more trappings of theocratic tendencies. This bill, in its mention that the courts should be guided by Hebrew traditions, Hebrew law, they don't say halakha, the official canon of Jewish law straight out, but even by reference to having to be guided by Jewish tradition, there is a theocratic slide. And that I would be very concerned about, particularly for a country that seeks to present itself as more LGBTQ positive than other countries, that has had an excellent record, let's say in the military, being open to gay and lesbian service people before other Western militaries have. Theocratic slippage is a real fear here.
Mira, if I may, I just want to let you know you have 1 minute left. 1 minute, thank you.
Finally, on international delegitimation, this bill is only going to inflame tensions around the globe as to the kind of country Israel is seeking to become. Israel claims it's the only democracy in the Middle East. It talks about being a light unto the nations. These kinds of actions don't serve the country's democratic self-image well, either internally or globally. Thank you.
Thank you, Mira. Okay, first to our presenters, to Mira and to Yoram, I want to let you know that both of your microphones are going to be open. So when you're speaking, the camera will automatically go to you. And also, just so you don't speak over each other, please know both of your mics are open. Again, the camera will come to you. I want to remind everybody who is joining us for this webinar that in order to submit a question, all you have to do is select chat on your screen, type your question to the host. So again, now is the time for everybody that has questions, simply hit chat and you'll be able to send a question to the host. I'm going to start things off, if I may. This question I'm going to pose to both of you. Mira, I'll give you the opportunity to answer first. So there's a new poll conducted by the Israel Democracy Institute. This particular poll found that almost 40% of Israeli Jews said a Jewish state law would damage interests of the state. So 40% said it would damage interests of the state, with just over 31% saying that it would promote the country's interests. First of all, Mira, do these numbers surprise you, and why or why not?
They don't surprise me. There have been many figures within Israel and within the diaspora Jewish community who have spoken out against the Jewish state law. We have the President Rivlin in Israel, who's been a very strong dissenter on this law. Leaders of the Reform and Conservative movements, American Jewish Committee, National Council of Jewish Women, Jewish Council for Public Affairs. So the fact that this is troubling to a majority, a strong plurality of Israeli Jews is not of concern. It is not surprising to me, and it is of concern. Add in the 20% of Israeli citizens who are Palestinian, and I think you'll find that the opposition to this bill is overwhelmingly opposed to it.
Yoram, I'd like to pose the same question to you. I'll quickly just give you the stats again. This is according to the Israel document. Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Or am I? Yoram, I'm sorry to interrupt. It looks like we may be having some technical difficulties. We're not sure, but our participants may not have heard that answer. We're going to try to get to the bottom of it and actually ask you to give that answer again. I know it's the beauty of technology. That was a great answer, and actually I think everyone will benefit from hearing it. So we're going to just make sure that everyone's audio is actually working, and then we'll make sure that we come back to you. So give us one moment, please. So Yoram, we're going to ask you to repeat that answer, and for everyone who's on the webinar, please send us a text just to confirm for us that you are able to actually hear Yoram's answer. So please let us know that your technology is working. Just text us letting us know that you can hear Yoram. Yoram, please go ahead with that answer again. So Yoram, I'm going to let you know that apparently we are still having some of these technical difficulties. I'll let you and everyone else know that this is being recorded. This will be put up on our website. Yoram's full answer will be there. So this is being recorded, Yoram. We're still working through the technical, which we're going to continue to work with on your microphone right now. So in the meantime, if I may, I will pose the next question to Mira, and we will continue, Yoram, to work on your audio. So Mira, I guess this question to you is as follows. A lot of the debate seems to be a result of the fact that Israel does not have a constitution. Do you think that Israel should adopt a constitution? And please let us know if yes, why.
Just want to start by piggybacking onto the tail end of the previous point, and then I'll get to this question if you don't mind. The previous point that Yoram had made about a strong majority of Israelis seeing no conflict between being a Jewish state and being a democracy. I think what the problem is here with this law is that this law would cause problems that prior to its invocation, Israelis simply didn't see as being there. So in other words, it has been fairly easy to square Israel's Jewish identity with its democracy until now. If this law were to come into play, then we would see a major conflict between Israel's Jewish character and its democracy. As for the question of the Constitution, it's true Israel does not formally have a Constitution. It has a series of so-called basic laws that form the core of a quasi-constitution. So far, I think Israel has done fairly well with using basic laws as a stand-in for a constitution. So I don't know how much a formal constitution would affect this. I mean, right now we're talking about the reason this law is so contentious is that it would have this sort of quasi-constitutional status. So I guess that's what I would say, is that it's not as urgent. It's more of a peculiarity, but the fact that Israel doesn't have a constitution, but it has a series of basic laws, is more of a peculiarity than an acute problem.
Okay, Mira, thank you. We're still working through Yoram's technology, the glitches. So I'm going to put one more question to Mira, and then we'll follow up, assuming we can get the audio down, with two straight to Yoram, if that's okay. So Mira, my question for you, I guess, would be, well, if Mahmoud Abbas insists that they will never recognize Israel as the Jewish state, and that, in fact, 6 million Palestinian people have a right of return to Israel, I guess my question is, do you think a Jewish nation state law would serve to thwart any Palestinian right of return, which would, of course, turn Israel into an Arab majority?
Whether or not Israel ends up allowing Palestinian refugees to return is not going to be based on whether Israel has a Jewish state law or not. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing is that this, again, the Jewish state demand, this came out of, now there is this Jewish state bill that I've argued would have very alarming implications for the state of Israel's democracy. But well before this, we know that Bibi Netanyahu had been demanding that Abbas recognize Israel as a Jewish state, which is where the question comes from. The PLO, which later became the Palestinian Authority, and Israel already exchanged mutual letters of recognition. In 1993, under the terms of the Oslo Accord, Arafat wrote to Yitzhak Rabin, the Prime Minister of Israel at the time, that he was recognized in the State of Israel. Israel does not need verbal recognition from the Palestinians about its character. Its character is a domestic issue, and the issue has been debated today mostly in a domestic capacity. So again, I don't believe that Israel is going to allow 4 to 5 million Palestinian refugees to return, and I don't think it's dependent on whether Israel has a Jewish state law or not. I'm just going to add one more thing about Abbas's recent statements that were translated from Arabic language media into English via the Times of Israel and perhaps other outlets as well. Abbas was, the headline of some of that coverage was that Abbas was becoming essentially more hardline and on the Palestinian refugee issue and was further demanding Palestinian refugee return. It was quite alarmist headlines. But if you read the interview closely, even in translation, I'm talking about, even in English translation, you see that what did Abbas say? Abbas said he said 6 million, I think that number's a bit inflated, but whatever it is, 5 million. There are 5 million refugees who wish to return. Israel is not going to allow it. We need to find creative solutions. Square that with the alarmist headlines that Abbas is an absolute rejectionist of Israel's demand for mutually agreeable settlement on the refugee issue, and you see how media and in turn social media can sometimes skew our view of the other.
Sorry, Amir, again, we're still trying to work through Dr. Hasney's audio. We do have a few questions that have come in from audience members. So, Amir, I'll post the first one to you. This is from Ron in Winnipeg. Ron asks, is the concern surrounding the Jewish state law more related to potential problems it may create, or are there any tangible issues that the law can have in and of itself?
I don't quite see a distinction. I think we're talking today about why the law is a bad idea, meaning what its implications
I'm sorry to interrupt. The only way I can reach Yoram right now is to do this, and then we'll go right back to that question. Yoram, please check your email address, because we just sent you an email, and we need to know if you're receiving that in order to then call in.
Call in using his phone.
And you'll call in using your phone. Thank you, Yoram. Sorry, Mayor. Please.
I'm not sure I really appreciate the intellectual, or sort of the analytical distinction that Ron in Winnipeg, my hometown, is making about whether the bill is problematic on its own terms or it's only problematic given its implications. I think we're here to talk about the ramifications of the bill should it be passed. But perhaps, Yoram, if we manage to get him back on, we'll have more insight into that, or perhaps Ron, the questioner, would like to clarify.
Okay, so Mayor, tell me this. If the core of the conflict for Israel is the Palestinian refusal to accept the fact that the Jewish people in Israel are a people with sovereign rights, if we accept that, then why should a bill in the Knesset emphasizing this right not be seen as a positive from Israel's point of view?
I guess I don't accept the factual premise of the question that the core of the conflict is the Palestinian refusal to recognize Jewish sovereignty, given that, as I mentioned in the last question, there was a mutual exchange of letters in 1993. Arafat recognized Israel's existence, and Israel in turn recognized the PLO as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. There was mutual recognition of the other's existence. I think anything more than that gets into deep philosophical questions that we might better conduct over beer.
Okay, Yoram, we're going to try to give you another question right now. We're going to test your audio live. So Yoram, here's the question. Please answer it one way or another, because some people can hear you and this will end up on our website. The question comes from Grafton in Ottawa. He asks, I find Dr. Hasney's argument that legislation is needed to protect against future Supreme Court ruling disconcerting. What is wrong with Israel's Declaration of Independence, and why or why not do we need to establish a constitution?
Well, Israel's Declaration of Independence is not a constitution. It's a document that you can say is part of Israel's constitutional tradition, but it's not a constitution. The Supreme Court in the year 2000, in a famous decision, Psak Din Kadan, declared the purpose of Israeli law, the general purpose of Israeli law, to be equality. Every one of us who are on all sides of this issue believe in the importance of civic equality for minorities and for the majority, for all individuals in the state of Israel. But the declaration that the purpose of Israeli law is equality is something that's unprecedented in any democratic legal regime in the world, as far as I know. The specific discussion is pretty technical, but to try to make it very simple, in order for a democracy to exist, it needs to balance considerations of equality with security, with liberty, with control of its population, with its customs and culture and education. All of these things need to be balanced in order to create a healthy country. The only reason that there is a democracy in the Middle East, one democracy in the Middle East, is because Israel is a Jewish state. It's because Israel has a majority of Jews, and Jewish values are such that we Jews, who are the overwhelming majority in Israel, we wish to have the kind of society in which Arabs and non-Arabs will be free to worship, free to speak, and free to have a good life. That's the reason there's a liberal democracy in the state of Israel. And what we need, the things that the Jewish majority needs to do in order to protect the Jewish character of the state, as far as I'm concerned, they're absolutely identical to the things that we need to do in order to protect minorities. I want to address some of Mira's points because, look, I hope you take this in good spirit, Mira. I wrote a book a few years ago called The Jewish State, in which I traced 120 years of objections to Herzl and Ben-Gurion and the Founding Fathers' idea of the Jewish state. And you know what? All of the objections for the last 120 years are exactly the same objections that Mira is making now, that we're in danger of becoming illiberal, that we're in danger of becoming a theocracy, that we're in danger of oppressing our minorities, that we're in danger of becoming xenophobic, that we're in danger of provoking the world to hate us because they won't be able to stand the idea of a particularistic Jewish state. All of these arguments were made in Herzl's day. All of these arguments were made by people who opposed the establishment of Israel at the time of the Balfour Declaration. And they were all made by people who opposed the UN partition plan. And they were all made by people who opposed Israel's Declaration of Independence. Read my book. Every single one of these points is made over and over again. And you know what? It's all nonsense. It doesn't add up. What actually happened historically is that the Jews came to Israel and they built the only democracy, the only liberal nation in the Middle East. Now, is it perfect? No. But guess what? The United States is not perfect either. I don't know, it seems to me that they're having some problems with their minorities in the United States as well. And the minorities in Israel have the added difficulty for Israelis that they're part of a majority in the Middle East that happens to still be waging war against the state of Israel. So yes, it's a little bit dicey for us to be able to pull off angelic relations between Jews and Arabs in the state of Israel. But I think that's not the point. I think the point is that the state of Israel is a liberal democracy. The current new elections in the state of Israel are being governed, they're being conducted by a Christian Arab who serves on Israel's Supreme Court. Where else in the Middle East can that kind of power go to Christian Arabs? Virtually nowhere. Not in Iraq, not in Syria, not in Saudi Arabia, not in Egypt, where? The state of Israel has created a place where Christians can worship freely, where they don't have to fear for their lives, where they can participate. If they choose, they can serve in the Israeli army, and they can be part of Israel just like the Jews and the Druze are, and many are doing so. I think we should be proud of this country instead of taking this the constitutional concept of a Jewish state, which made Israel what it is, and dumping on it every nightmare that we have about every terrible thing we might become. Let's be proud of this Jewish state of ours. Understand that we need to do certain things in order to protect it. Those things are not going to destroy the country any more than they were going to lead to a xenophobic, a theocratic, fascistic country 100 years ago or 50 years ago. You should have more faith in us, the people of Israel. We're good people. We want good for our minorities, and we want good for ourselves, and that's what we're going to do.
Yorm, thank you. So first of all, it's about 2:58. I would ask, and I know, Mira, I believe you may have another commitment, but if it's at all possible to stay on for another 10 minutes, because now that we have Yorm's audio back, there's more questions coming in, and so if it's at all possible, please, Yorm and Mira and all of our participants, if you could stay for another 10 minutes. We're going to go a little bit over time. Thank you, Mira. Yoram, the next question comes to you from Rochelle in Calgary. Rochelle asks, what decisions has the current court made that you believe undermine Israel as a Jewish state? What decisions has the current court made that you feel undermines Israel as a Jewish state?
Well, I began to address that in the last question. There's a series of decisions, but if you need to read one, then read Psak Din Kadan, the Kadan decision from 2000. This is a decision which is absolutely, as I say, unprecedented in the history of democratic nations, in which the Supreme Court, over a 30-page decision answering all sorts of questions that were actually completely tangential to the case, declared that Israeli law needs to be based solely on what's called ha-tachlit ha-klalit, the general aim of equality. And there are no other purposes for Israeli law. It sounds like it doesn't make sense because it doesn't make any sense. But it's worked out in 30 pages. And for example, in the Kadan decision, the court imports Brown versus Board of Education from American constitutional litigation and law in order to declare that any kind of provisions for separate but equal cultural institutions or educational institutions in the State of Israel are prima facie problematic from a legal constitutional perspective. Now try to understand this. The State of Israel has a Jewish school system. It has an Arab school system. Most of the Jews want their children to be educated as Jews. Most of the Arabs want their children to be educated in Arab traditions. The kinds of things that led the United States completely correctly to decide that separate white and black schools was basically just a sham in order to oppress the blacks are totally irrelevant for the State of Israel, where Jews want their children to be educated as Jews, and Arabs, most of them want their children to be educated as Arabs. The Arabs are allowed to apply to Jewish schools, and in some places Arabs do go to Jewish schools. It's not that we have some kind of hard and fast rule. But what the Supreme Court in the Kadan decision did in bringing in Brown versus Board of Education is now part of Israeli constitutional law is to declare that de facto, regardless of what we're doing now, it's immoral and illegal to be pursuing the educational system that we currently have. Now that decision is a ticking time bomb. At the end of the decision, there's this, I have to tell you, extremely creepy paragraph that ends the decision that says, we know where we need to go. The way is still long. There are many obstacles still in our path. However, step by step, we will gradually move towards the achievement of what it is that we understand that the State of Israel needs to be. Now, in the context of a law that brings in Brown versus Board of Education, I have to tell you that this is a ticking time bomb. What this decision says is that within some number of years, a Supreme Court is going to rule that you're not allowed to have Jewish schools in the State of Israel. And after that, they'll also rule that we're not allowed to send our armed forces to defend Jews abroad, and after that they'll say that the law of return is also illegal because it doesn't fit the general purpose of equality. That's a huge danger, and we need to deal with that now.
Excellent. Thank you, Yoram. Mira, I would love to offer you the opportunity to respond to what Yoram just said. Would you like to take that up?
Okay, so a few points that I wanted to make in response to Yoram. One is just, I guess I want to call attention to a problematic debating tactic, if I might, and that is Yoram's attempt to challenge my argument based on association, meaning based on who among others in the history of Western thought have made those arguments. So of course, that others who may have posed Herzl's vision said things similar to me doesn't say anything about the merit or drawbacks of my argument. So we want to be careful not to use association as the primary driver of constructing an argument or a counter-argument. So that's the first thing I want to say. On the issue of equality versus security, obviously a big issue in Israeli political discourse. I want to draw attention to a fundamental problem here, though. equality is an ordinal category. In other words, you can't be a little bit equal in public thought, in political thought, as a citizen. Either you are granted equal rights as a fundamental tenet of being a citizen of a democracy, or you're not. Security, on the other hand, is very much an ordinal idea. So in other words, equality is sort of a nominal idea. You either are equal or you're not. In security, we can never have as much security as we would wish. If I wanted to be totally safe and secure myself, I would never get into a car, right? So Israel, as a policy move, can claim that its lack of equality is for security ends. But as we know, it's a very slippery slope when it comes to democratic states, because the moment that you trample civil liberties or treat equality on a spectrum, you're in very dangerous territory. That is, unless Israel doesn't want to be a democracy, in which case it would fit an authoritarian view of the world. The final thing I want to say is, again, arguing that we're good people. I don't know Yoram personally. We've had some nice exchanges over email leading up to this debate. We obviously have a lot of common intellectual and political interests. Whether or not Yoram is a good person, or I'm a good person, or Israelis are good people, again, not a very airtight way I would submit respectfully to defend the issue here. And really, finally, what we're talking about here is not whether Israel has a right to exist under its current identity. All countries are going to determine their identity as they see fit. Israel is a Jewish state by dint of believing itself to be a Jewish state. And no one here, the topic of today's debate is not to debate that. The topic of today's debate is to talk about what implications, political, legal, strategic, will flow or may flow from the adoption of a particular law that's been on the Israeli political agenda.
So, Mira, thank you very much. Okay, we have time now, Mira and Yoram, for just some closing remarks. Despite the technical issues, I think we did afford a balance of time. I hope we did. And I think we certainly got very, very close. So we'd like to now offer each of you about 2 to 3 minutes max for some closing remarks. Yoram, we'd like to start with you. Please go ahead.
Okay. Well, Mira, you're right. You don't know me very well. And I would never stoop to guilt by association, associating you with people who I think you would feel like you shouldn't be associated with. The people who I have in mind who made the same arguments that you made are highly distinguished and precious Jews like Judah Magnus, Martin Buber, Albert Einstein, Hannah Arendt, Gershom Scholem, and many, many other intellectuals who opposed the establishment of a Jewish state for the same reasons that you're opposing them. This is not a guilt by association, because those are wonderful people to be associated with. The point is that the exact arguments, the fear of theocracy, xenophobia, illiberalism, of provoking the world, of what will the Goyim say, these same precise, exact arguments, I'm talking about the content of the argument, not who are they associated with, have for 120 years been used in order to try to prevent the establishment of a Jewish state. Now, you're absolutely right that Israel is going to make of itself what it decides to make of itself. But what we're debating is what should it decide to make of itself. And as Herzl taught us, the goal of Zionism has to be not for Jews to be Jewish in their hearts, but for there to be nationally, legally legislated, and internationally recognized Jewish constitutional regime. He went to the British and to the other nations of the world and said, help us to create the one legally recognized Jewish regime in the world, that the nations of the world will look at it and they'll say, yes, we'll help that state exist, we'll help that state pursue self-determination as a Jewish state. For that, you have to have Jewish laws. That's what Herzl thought, that's what Ben-Gurion thought. Their greatest nightmare was that a Supreme Court would come along one day like this one and say, wow, we don't need any legal protections for the Jewish character of the state. And in so doing, we will move to turn the state of Israel, which right now has a Jewish majority, into a state that is not a Jewish state. It's an Israeli neutral state that it has a Jewish majority, but it doesn't have Jewish schools, and it doesn't have a law of return, and it's not allowed to send its armed forces wherever it wishes to defend Jews. That's a reality that is very, very possible. And responsible people can understand that Israel has to do certain legal things in order to make sure that it can continue to exist. And saying it's going to exist, simply asserting it, isn't good enough. Sometimes we do need to do things to protect ourselves, and constitutional provision which will entrench existing legislation which doesn't take anything away from anybody and doesn't add or subtract anything from the current existing status quo for the first 50, 60 years of the country. I think that's a perfectly safe piece of legislation, and it's not going to do virtually anything other than to block the machinations of a Supreme Court which really should not be empowered to do what it's doing. Thanks.
Okay, Mira, same opportunity, 2 to 3 minutes, please, for closing remarks. Thank you.
Great. I'll just conclude with a couple of points. One is that if the concern is shoring up Israel's Jewish identity, I would suggest that the energy being put into this nation-state bill, which from a consequentialist perspective, in other words, from a moral perspective, what are the consequences that will or may flow from this, I pointed to as being very dire on about 8 or 9 different fronts. Take that same legislative and political energy and put it towards the ministries of arts and culture in Israel. Try to stem the tide of what Israelis call lohazit, meaning the incorporation of foreign words, most often English, into Hebrew. When you read, if you follow, those of you who aren't native Hebrew speakers, if you follow Israeli sites on social media, you'll see more and more English words just put into Hebrew letters, phrases. So is it the stemming of the dilution of Hebrew culture that is the concern? Do national honors like the Israel Prize need more propping up? Films like Footnote, which was a fabulous film that put Israeli filmmaking on the map, actually serve to underscore the importance that honors, national artistic honors and intellectual honors like the Israel Prize hold in today's Israeli society. So these kinds of things. What I would actually argue then is rather than setting up a competition between Israel's national groups through legislative means, such that the 20% of non-Jews will feel legally slighted and by this bill, I would argue for a radical multiculturalism which urges Israeli citizens to explore their national languages and cultures and heritage in as sophisticated and fluent a way as possible. I'll just close with one point, and that is I welcome the opportunity to debate this bill with an Israeli citizen, because of course it's Yoram whose vote is going to count, not mine. I do not vote in Israel. I'm not a citizen of Israel, and there has been a long tradition of debating and dialoguing between the diaspora and Israel. And this webinar underscores the ongoing thirst for that, the desire for that, and the importance of that. So thank you.
Once again, I want to thank Dr. Mira Sukharov, Dr. Yoram Hazny for taking the time out of their busy schedules to offer your extremely valuable insights on this very important topic. And again, thank you for your patience as we dealt with the technical difficulties. For anyone who joined us late, or if you know anyone that was unable to join us, or if you want to miss some of Dr. Hazny's answers, you can go see this webinar again on our website, www.CIJA.ca. Again, if you want to learn more about this organization, some of the issues that we're involved with, go to our website, sign up for our Facebook, go like us on Facebook, sign up for our Twitter account. Our handle's @CIJA-Info. On behalf of everyone here at the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, thank you all once again for joining and for participating in today's webinar.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Hear, hear.
Thanks.
Are you sure we're not?